The Ghost That Walked on Air. A Carping Gnome ghost story. Only a few years ago, my nephew Stephen and a friend had a likely encounter with the supernatural. An encounter which some might envy and others might dread. Stephen was fishing just a short way down from where I had encountered a shadowy, quiet smoker that managed to walk through a hedgerow and a barbed wire fence. The location was the Stewpony junction where the Stourbridge Canal meets the Staffordshire and Worcester Canal. It is a scenic spot with Staunton Castle in the background on its hill. On one towpath, a white wooden finger post, close to an 18th century canal bridge, points the way in all directions. That night, it seems, it was pointing to the other side. I am pleased to relate that Stephen wasn't fishing alone. He was enjoying a carp session with his father David, my brother, and a long-standing fishing friend Danny. And this fact is significant because Danny also witnessed the spook, which was a particularly bizarre apparition. Stephen, who had just landed a fine canal chub over 4 pounds in weight, happened to glance across the expansive junction to the Staffs Worcester section, and he noticed how a figure was approaching. It was heading towards the little bridge along the towpath. At first he assumed it was merely someone out for a late night stroll, but with thunder in the air and the threat of a heavy storm to follow, it was scarcely a night for a walk. Stephen explained how he watched the approaching figure for half a minute and perhaps even more, and it was with a sense of bewilderment or fascination rather than dread that he noticed how the visitant appeared to be walking a little way above the ground with an odd, lolloping gait. Even worse, when the apparition moved into a patch of moonlight, only its legs could be seen, legs moving in the air, almost as if pedalling an invisible bike. The figure's torso had vanished completely, but when it moved again into darkness, only its torso and head could be observed, moving with that odd disjointed motion as if important bones had been broken. As the weird spectacle neared the bridge, the whole of it could be seen, a grotesque approximation of a man lit head to toe by a baleful light. Stephen assures me that his overwhelming response was still one of fascination rather than fear, although afterwards he was plagued by a reoccurring nightmare of the event, which he did find disturbing. Then, just when it seemed as if the unearthly visitor was about to cross the bridge to Stephen's side, it vanished. And Danny, who had been observing the figure's approach also, shouted out, "Did you see that? It must have been a ghost!" My brother David was most disappointed that he'd seen nothing at all, because he'd been too busy focusing on his night float at the time. To his eternal credit, he returned there alone, camera at the ready, for several nights afterwards. This was less for the carp and more for an image of the spook, but the spectre failed to oblige him, I'm sorry to say, and so did the carp on those occasions. He deserved at least one fish for his bravery. There is an interesting postscript to this tale. Stewpony Junction is little more than a shout away from Gibbet Wood, where in the early 19th century the body of a footpad and murderer called Billy Howe had been suspended in chains. This followed his execution on the gallows, but his spirit did not take too kindly to the gross indignity. The resulting tales had been well documented over the years by a fine local newspaper, the Black Country Bugle. Regency drunks, so the story goes, once gathered at the foot of the swinging gibbet and inquired about the health of the body. Billy Howe, how art thou now?" "Cold, "Unclammy," the corpse replied. Moving on to 1940, a local woman who had been walking by Gibbet Wood at night reported how she had been followed by a male figure with a stretched neck and a head that swayed from side to side, I quote, as if the neck had been broken through the craft of the hangman. Was this the unearthly, disjointed figure which was witnessed by both Danny and Stephen at Stupony Junction, while the summer thunder rumbled overhead?